Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. This is the Quantum Zodiac series, and today we are exploring the planet Mercury. Now, Mercury is usually associated with familiar keywords like communication, information, language, and learning. It's related to the mind and our curiosity, and also transportation and movement. So today I want to look a little deeper into these keywords. Where do they come from? What do they actually all have in common? And essentially dive into what is the root principle underneath them. Now, in the quantum zodiac lens, Mercury corresponds to the fundamental principle of relativity. So if we strip Mercury down to its bare frame, what we are left with is relativity. And in physics, relativity, made famous by Albert Einstein, as we know, tells us that the speed of light is constant, but measurements of time and space depend on the observer's motion as well as their gravitational environment. So this theory of relativity took us out of the assumption that time is the same for everybody, and it took us out of the assumption that there is one neutral observation that we are all experiencing and looking at, and instead we now understand our observations are not neutral, they are all relative to each other. So this theory says light moves at one speed, and by the time it takes for observers to measure events depends on their relative movement and gravitational environment. So it means we are not all having the same experience. Everything that we see is illuminated by light. So in a very real sense, everything that we perceive is because of light, is visible and structured because of light. So if observation itself depends on our relative position and relative movement, that means perception itself is relative. Now, because of relativity, we can no longer assume that two people are perceiving something in the same way or having the same experience. We are each moving through reality very differently. We are each interacting with different amounts of information, and therefore we are each experiencing time differently. And this is Mercury. So Mercury governs perception, the way you move through information, and the way information moves through you. And it's the speed, the rhythm, and the structure of your awareness. Now, in the Jupiter episode, we talked about gravity being like grammar, right? Gravity determines how much we need to externally connect or synchronize with something to hold meaning. Now, just as a quick example of that, we can imagine two people who share a private language that only they understand. And when they speak, meaning only needs to reconcile between the two of them, so that gravitational field of their conversation is small. The less observers, the less constraints, the less mass or gravity. And in contrast, if we imagine, let's say, a parliament session taking place in a country, right? Hundreds of people are speaking not only a language that millions or even billions interact with and rely on, but the words that they used have to be defined very carefully. There's a high constraint on what terms they use. The grammar must be very exact and stable, precise, because these interpretations affect entire systems. These conversations are affecting the law or the economy or the social structure. It affects many, many people en masse, and this would be high gravity. So the more mass involved, the more curvature in space-time, and in physics, we know that stronger gravity actually slows time relative to weaker gravity. So that's saying that a clock in a stronger gravitational field will tick more slowly compared to clocks farther away from that field. Now, I know this can seem quite abstract, but we can apply this to our own experience in something as simple as explaining how busy days can feel like time is moving fast, and boring days can feel like time is moving slow. And that's because of this law of relativity, right? So higher gravity gives that time dilation, which gives a slower clock relative to others. So in our experience, in a day where you're processing many events, that's giving you that high mass, your mind is perceiving more and more change, and that makes it feel like time is moving quickly. Whereas if you have fewer events to process, you're perceiving less and less change, and so that time dilation, it feels like it's being dragged. Now, if we think of, well, there is no time, there's just the present moment, just the now moment. But if you keep incarnating the same event into the present moment, there's no new data, no new events to process, and time feels slow. Whereas if you are incarnating multiple different events into each moment, there are new conversations, new stimuli, new ideas, new things to perceive, and it's processing all of those perceptions and that change, and so time feels fast. And so this is Mercury governing our relativity. And I want to bring in here the work of Donald Hoffman, who speaks about how space-time itself can arise from these networks of what he calls conscious agents interacting. Essentially, he calls it trace logic, and it's how our perceptions, all the different stimuli or events, overlap and interact with each other, and how this or space-time emerges from this interaction. So he uses a simple metaphor to just explain this of a traffic light. So if we imagine, let's say my traffic light has 4 lights on it. It's green, and then it goes orange to warn before it turns yellow, and then it goes red. So we have green, orange, yellow, and red. That orange is appearing just before the yellow as like a double warning, and then the person next to me only has 3 lights. They have green, yellow, red. And we are sitting at the same intersection. We assume we are perceiving the same thing, but I am actually perceiving an additional event. And that means that I am adding one more transition. And so my perceptual system is adding one more experience into my moment. And in a sense, my experienced time contains an extra tick on my clock. And neither of us knows that the other is perceiving something different, right? We just assume that others see what we see. We assume that their world looks like ours. But perception is relative to the, I guess, interface that we are using. And so how many lights are on your traffic signal, right? What frequency are you essentially tuned into? What data are you registering that either others share the same data or they don't? You have your unique data set of what you are experiencing that will naturally align with some in certain ways and not align with some in other ways. So the overlap, the green, yellow, and red, we synchronize and we can communicate and perceive each other because those experiences are overlapping. And when there is no overlap, there is no perception. There's no shared perception, so you can't perceive each other, right? So the more overlap, the more close in a perception, the more you would be able to perceive someone else. The less overlap, the less perception, the less you would be able to perceive someone else. And this is why communication is so necessary, because without that dialogue, we just assume that it's the same, and without being able to talk about and discuss our experiences, then we don't realize that there are differences in them, right? So through that dialogue, we discover the relativity that's going on in our experiences. So when we look at Mercury in a chart, we are looking at how quickly someone processes information, the type of information that they are tuned into or attuned to, their perceptual rhythm, their internal clock. So some Mercuries will move quicker than others and be tuned into different information. Now, Mercury rules two signs. It rules Gemini and Virgo. Both are mutable because our perception is constantly changing. It's constantly adjusting. So in Gemini, Mercury is the information that we are receiving. It's the receiver and what we are tuned into. So are you tuned into the traffic light with 4 lights or with 3, right? How many lights are you perceiving on your traffic light? And Gemini, being known as the sign of the twins, receivers work in this way, right? You need to be a match for the frequency you are wanting to receive. You need to be a twin, essentially. So if you tune into a radio station, for example, it's because your receiver or antenna is oscillating at the same frequency as the radio station is broadcasting. So different frequency, different radio station. So Gemini is that receiver and the tuning dial, which is why we get these associations of Gemini with being curious and social and adaptable, right? They want to experience diverse perceptions or diverse perspectives. Gemini is aware that there are many perceptions and it's curious to explore them. And the way to explore that range, to explore the differences, the diversity, is to communicate. What do I see versus what do you see? You will never know the other person is experiencing something different unless you communicate and talk about what you are perceiving. So Gemini is aware of the relativity of perception. Now we have the other sign that Mercury rules, which is Virgo. And Virgo is our perception. It's our perceiving mind, how we perceive our own experience. So if Gemini is receptive to what is being broadcast on a certain channel, Virgo is watching the show and is analyzing what it perceives. It's trying to make sense of it. It's trying to understand it. So this is where you get associations of Virgo with being analytical and meticulous and precise, or also detail-oriented, right? Very observant, and I would say even studious, because it wants to analyze and learn, because it wants to understand. And the representation of the Virgin is in this effort to have a pure perception. It is concerned with the purity of what it is perceiving. Because if it perceives something incorrectly or distorted, it causes an illness essentially in the system. So something we are just starting to grow more familiar with each day is that systems cannot fundamentally be ill, right? So, but a wrong perception of a system causes all kinds of illness and chaos. So as an example, if you don't perceive the rope on the floor correctly, you can interpret it or perceive it as a snake, and you can become afraid, right? And we've all had an experience, or many, where we have perceived something to be terrifying, right? Maybe a noise. We thought we were in danger, and it turns out, I don't know, something just fell off a shelf, right? But our perceptions create our experience. So if we perceive it as danger, then we have that experience. So Virgo is highly concerned with our perceptions being clear. It doesn't want us to perceive the rope incorrectly and see a snake, right? So it's meticulous in its analyzing of that data that we are receiving. And that is why it is perfectionistic, right? Also why it's the healer. Because you heal the perception, and that is actually the only way to truly heal something. And that's its job. So in this way, it is being of service to your entire experience in this realm. Because the more purely it can analyze your perception, the more purely it can perceive, the more it is being of service to you in a helpful way during your incarnation. So it's always looking for that pure perception to have a pure experience. So I hope this helps to put Mercury in a little deeper context where you can develop a deeper relationship to the planet and what its goals are, what its purpose is, what it is designed for, and maybe even relate to it in a more meaningful way for you. Now, I have built a very intentional Mercury themed yin yoga practice for integrating and understanding this energy more, and that is available on my website at enchantedistrology.ca. If you feel called to check it out, please do. And as always, thank you so deeply for listening in today. I will be back soon for the next episode in our Quantum Zodiac series, where we travel to the moon.